It is May 6, 2026. The World Cup starts in exactly 36 days. Brazil announces their final squad in 12 days.
Which is practically tomorrow.
Right. And Neymar Jr. has not played a single minute of football for his country in 31 months.
Wow.
Yeah, he just had a physical altercation with a teenager in practice. And yet, against every conceivable metric of conventional sporting logic, this man still might go to the World Cup.
I mean, it creates a scenario that, frankly, just defies belief. You have the most demanding footballing nation on earth entirely paralyzed by a single roster decision.
Totally paralyzed.
Right. And the clock is practically deafening at this point.
Right.
The external pressure on the coaching staff is immense, and the variables we're dealing with are incredibly volatile.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you're joining us today, you're stepping right into the absolute epicenter of one of the most chaotic, high-stakes narratives we have ever opened up on this show.
Yeah, we are really getting into it today.
Our mission today is to unpack an extensive, genuinely mind-boggling research dossier simply titled, "Will Neymar Make It to the World Cup?"
A simple question with a very complicated answer.
Exactly, and we're addressing you directly right now, wherever you're listening, because you need to understand that this is not just a standard sports update.
No, not at all.
You don't even need to be a diehard football fan to grasp the gravity of this.
That is the crucial point here. I mean, if you strip away the jerseys and the stadiums, what we're really looking at is a profound, real-time drama about the human limits of an aging prodigy.
Right.
It's this fundamental clash between the rigid, uncompromising demands of team discipline and the intoxicating, well, the irrational allure of pure talent.
Oh, absolutely.
And hovering over all of it is this agonizing countdown to a deadline that will definitively shape a legacy. It's really a masterclass in how a giant institution grapples with its own historical identity.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even attempt to understand why Carlo Ancelotti, who is famously one of the most pragmatic, level-headed managers in the history of the sport,
It's truly one of the best.
right before we can understand why he is currently wavering on what to do with Neymar today, we have to rewind the tape. We cannot evaluate May 2026 without looking at exactly what Neymar has been doing.
Or rather, what he hasn't been doing.
Exactly. What he has entirely failed to do since October 2023. We are talking about a 31-month odyssey here.
The timeline really is the foundational piece of this entire puzzle. When you see that 31-month figure in the dossier, that represents the gaping void since his last cap for the Brazilian national team.
Which was against Uruguay, right?
Yeah, that fateful match against Uruguay in October 2023, that was the night he suffered the initial devastating tear to his anterior cruciate ligament, his ACL.
A massive injury.
Huge. But the medical trauma of that night is really only the inciting incident. What happens between that night in Montevideo and today is where the narrative completely fractures.
Right. Let's get into what I've been calling the Saudi black hole while reading through these notes. Because the math here it's breaking my brain.
It's hard to comprehend, honestly.
Let's trace the steps. He leaves the highest levels of European competition. He signs with the Saudi club Al Hilal. He earns reported guaranteed wages that comfortably exceed $100 million.
Which is astronomical.
And the dossier confirms that during an 18-month period over there, he played a grand total of 7 matches. 7!
It's a statistical anomaly for a player of that caliber. I mean, 7 matches in a year and a half.
It's baffling. Think about it like this. Imagine you have a friend who is a top-tier executive. They take a massive, unprecedented corporate payout to go work overseas, but they effectively disappear from the industry.
Right. They just vanish.
They do barely any actual work for a year and a half. And then suddenly they show back up in their hometown, knocking on the door of their old company, applying for their old job.
As if nothing happened.
Yeah. And their PR team is blanketing the media, calling it a glorious homecoming. Sure, it sounds romantic, but any rational hiring manager is looking at that resume and saying, what did you actually do for the last year and a half?
And that is exactly how sports economists and tactical analysts are viewing that Saudi stint right now.
How could they not?
His media apparatus has leaned heavily into this framing of a romantic return to Santos. You know, the historic Brazilian club where he first became a global sensation as a skinny teenager.
The prodigal son returns.
Exactly. But if you strip away the sentimentality, That 18-month period in Saudi Arabia is a glaring gap in the resume.
But hold on, the PR spin works because people want to believe it, right? They want that story.
Yeah.
But I need to understand the physical reality of what an 18-month gap actually does to a human being who is supposed to be an elite athlete.
Yeah, the physiology is unforgiving.
But like, what is actually happening to his body during that time?
That is where the reality gets incredibly harsh. The minutes per dollar ratio during his time at Al Hilal is obviously astronomical, but from a purely athletic standpoint, playing 7 matches in 18 months represents a period of extreme physiological stagnation.
Stagnation, that's a great word for it.
Yeah. When a high-performance athlete isn't playing competitive matches, they lose match sharpness. And that isn't just a cliche, it is a measurable decline in cardiovascular endurance, spatial awareness, and the fast-twitch muscle fiber response.
The stuff you need to react instantly.
Precisely. You need that to react to unpredictable, high-speed game situations. You simply cannot simulate the physiological stress of a competitive match in a training drill.
And that physiological stress is exactly what we have to confront next in the dossier, because the medical timeline doesn't just stop at the ACL tear in October 2023.
Oh no, it gets much more complicated.
Fast forward to December 2025. That is barely 6 months ago. And just 6 months before this upcoming World Cup, he undergoes another arthroscopic procedure on his left knee.
It's really the worst possible timing.
I'm reading this and thinking, sure, surgeons can go in and clean up some cartilage, they can fix a meniscus, but did they fix his career hopes?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, how does a 34-year-old whose entire identity on the pitch is built on explosive, multi-directional movement realistically prepare his body for the absolute crucible of a World Cup after that kind of gap?
It is the defining medical question of this entire saga. If we connect this to the bigger picture of biomechanics, a player like Neymar relies on sudden deceleration.
Right, stopping on a dime.
Exactly. He runs at full speed, stops completely, drops his shoulder, and completely changes direction. That specific movement profile places an immense, violent load on the knee joint.
Which sounds terrifying for someone with a recent surgery.
It requires absolute structural stability.
Which he clearly doesn't have if they had to go back into the knee in December.
Correct. The arthroscopic procedure in December 2025, even if we assume it was just a cleanup and far less invasive than the full ACL reconstruction, it fundamentally interrupts a crucial phase of conditioning.
Because he has to stop and recover all over again.
Yeah. And when you are 34 years old, cellular regeneration is measurably slower than when you are 24. Muscle memory requires significantly more repetition to maintain.
It's an uphill battle.
And more importantly, the surrounding musculature, the quadriceps, the hamstrings, the calves that act as shock absorbers for that vulnerable knee joint, all of that has to be rebuilt meticulously.
So you don't just wake up and decide to be in World Cup form.
You absolutely do not. You have to painstakingly engineer your fitness. It becomes a mathematical equation of managing load and recovery.
And he's out of time.
Right, because of that December setback, he is attempting to solve that equation with zero margin for error.
Which elevates the stakes of this next month from just a sports story to something almost mythic. Let's look at the legacy that is actually on the line here.
The historical weight of this is massive.
If Neymar somehow defies the medical odds, if he makes this 26-man squad, and if he steps onto the pitch in June, it will be his 5th World Cup.
A staggering achievement in itself.
Yeah.
Very few players ever reach that number.
It's historic. I mean, he was there in South Africa in 2010. He was the golden boy for the catastrophic heartbreak on home soil in 2014.
Yeah, the injury in that tournament changed everything.
Then he was there for the quarterfinal exit in 2018 and the agonizing injury-plagued run in Qatar in 2022. If he plays next month, he becomes the very first Brazilian in the history of the sport to ever play in 5 World Cups.
Which should be the ultimate triumph.
But here is the massive, unavoidable kicker in the dossier. Across those previous 4 tournaments, he has 0 titles.
And that 0 is the gaping void in his trophy cabinet that defines his entire current psychology.
It has to haunt him.
We are talking about a player who has produced moments of absolute transcendent brilliance. He is Brazil's all-time leading scorer. He has 79 goals and 128 caps.
Which is unbelievable.
He literally surpassed the official goal tally of Pelé for the national team. But the ultimate prize, the only prize that truly immortalizes you in Brazil, has completely eluded him.
And speaking of that psychological burden, there is a statistic in the dossier that provides this hilarious, almost cruel contrast to this whole legacy conversation.
Oh, I know exactly which one you mean.
I laughed out loud when I read this. So Neymar just recently scored a brace against Vasco da Gama, right? And that officially made him Santos' 10th all-time highest scorer.
Which is a big deal.
Right. He has 151 goals across his 2 stints for the club. By any normal human metric, being the 10th highest scorer for one of the most famous clubs in the world is a fantastic, monumental achievement.
It is a legendary milestone.
But then you look at who is sitting at number 1 on that Santos all-time list, it's Pelé. And how many goals does Pelé have for Santos?
It's an absurd number.
1,061. The gap between Neymar sitting at number 10 with 151 and Pelé at number 1 is almost 1,000 goals.
Yeah, 1,061 is just, it's video game numbers from another era.
It perfectly illustrates the sheer, towering, completely unscalable shadow that Neymar has had to live under his entire life.
This raises an important question about how we contextualize success. That stat perfectly highlights the impossibility of his situation.
He can never win.
No matter what Neymar achieves, and as we established, his achievements are objectively spectacular. The ghost of Pelé is always in the room.
Sitting right there on the bench with him.
Exactly. The expectation from the Brazilian public isn't just greatness. It is absolute perfection. It is prolific, world-conquering success.
Anything less is a disappointment.
Anything less is viewed as a failure of potential. And right now, heavily burdened by that history, his every single move is under a microscopic level of scrutiny.
Okay, so his body is battered, the medical timeline is incredibly tight, and the legacy pressure is suffocating.
That's the baseline.
The next logical thing I have to ask, looking at the dossier, is what does it actually look like when he laces up his boots right now? Because he is back on the pitch at Santos.
He is playing. He is out there.
Yeah. And the answer the research provides reveals this bizarre, almost perfectly balanced ratio. For every ounce of on-pitch brilliance, there is an equal measure of absolute off-pitch chaos.
The current 2026 season data paints a fascinating, completely contradictory picture. You have a player whose physical engine is undeniably compromised, yet the underlying quality remains potent.
The talent doesn't just disappear.
Right. Let's look at the actual output. In 2026, he has made 11 appearances for Santos. He has tallied 4 goals and 3 assists.
Which, let's be honest, those are not the, the video game numbers of peak 2015 Neymar.
They are not. But they are highly effective, highly efficient numbers for a domestic league.
And it's not just tapping the ball in. He's still producing magic. I'm looking at the notes from the Copa Sudamericana match against Deportivo Recoleta.
That was a huge game for him.
It was a gritty 1-1 draw, but he scored the lone goal and he walked away with an 8.8 match rating. He was undeniably the man of the match.
He dictated the whole game.
The dossier points out he has 12 goal contributions in his last 10 games overall. That is, without question, his best, most consistent run of form since he tore his ACL 2.5 years ago.
He is definitely producing.
But how is he staying on the pitch? The dossier mentions that Santos manager Cuca has him on a specialized medical roadmap. Let's look at the actual mechanism there. What does that actually mean in practice?
Cuca's approach is essentially an exercise in extreme athletic load management.
Like we see in basketball a lot.
Exactly like that. They are operating with the full understanding that his knee cannot handle the standard workload of a professional season. The medical roadmap means every single minute is rationed.
So no full 90-minute games?
Never. He doesn't play 90 minutes, he plays 60. If there is a high-intensity, physically bruising match on the schedule, like the massive derby against Palmeiras, he is rested completely.
So they are essentially bubble wrapping him between games?
Exactly. They are treating him like a highly fragile, highly valuable asset. The entire strategy is designed specifically to ensure that when Neymar does step onto the pitch, he has enough physiological reserves to deliver those flashes of brilliance like that 8.8 match rating performance without his knee swelling up or giving out completely.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Managing the physical knee seems to be the easy part for Santos.
That's the part they can measure, yeah.
Managing the psychology and the behavior is where this whole experiment seems to be catching fire.
Cool.
And not in a good way.
The behavioral management is where the friction is generating the most heat, yes.
I mean, let's talk about May 4th. This is just a few days ago. This is the absolute peak of the chaos detailed in the dossier.
It was a shocking headline to wake up to.
Neymar gets into a physical altercation, a fight on the training ground. And he doesn't just get into a shoving match with a veteran defender. He physically trips an 18-year-old teammate.
A kid, basically.
A kid named Robinho Jr., the son of the former Real Madrid and Brazil player Robinho. And why did he trip him? I'm reading this and I can't believe it. He tripped him because the teenager had the audacity to dribble past him during a reserve session.
It is an astonishing lack of emotional regulation.
It's pure spite.
Yeah.
You have a 34-year-old global icon, a guy with 79 international goals, lashing out at an 18-year-old kid in a practice scrimmage because his ego got bruised by a step-over.
If we look at the timing, it is disastrous.
It couldn't be worse.
When you are desperately fighting to prove your maturity and reliability to a national team manager who is openly skeptical of your commitment, the absolute last thing you can afford is a global headline about assaulting a youth player.
It ruins the whole redemption arc.
It completely undercuts the narrative of the seasoned, mature veteran returning home to lead by example.
And the cultural details surrounding this make it so much worse. The dossier dives into the Brazilian media's reaction.
The media had a field day with this.
In the cultural context of Brazilian football, Robinho Jr. is considered Neymar's godson, his padrinho. There is a deep generational lineage there.
It's a passing of the torch scenario.
Or it's supposed to be. Neymar idolized the father. Now he's supposed to be mentoring the son. The dossier has this incredible line summarizing the public reaction. The godfather did not send flowers instead.
Yeah, that line says it all.
He didn't pull the kid aside and give him advice. He just hacked him down.
And the institutional fallout was immediate. This wasn't something that was laughed off in the locker room
It
showers.
didn't just stay in-house.
No. Robinho Jr.'s representation filed a formal complaint directly with Santos management. They demanded accountability, specifically a public apology.
Which is wild. The club actually forced him to do it.
They did. And the optics of that apology are a perfect microcosm of his current existence.
How so?
Well, after that very same match against Recoleta, where he was brilliant on the pitch, he had to stand in front of the press corps and publicly apologize for losing his temper in training.
The same day?
You have the sublime talent and the petulant behavior encapsulated in a single 24-hour news cycle.
It is the ultimate Jekyll and Hyde situation. And of course, because we live in 2026, we have to navigate the bizarre layer of AI misinformation that got slapped on top of this.
Oh, the fake video. That was everywhere.
The dossier notes that a video of this training ground fight went massively viral. Everyone on social media was sharing it, analyzing it like the Zapruder film.
People were breaking down every frame of it.
But Yahoo Sports fact-checkers had to quickly intervene and prove that the most viral version of this video was entirely AI-generated content stamped from November 2024.
The modern media ecosystem amplifies the chaos exponentially.
It really does. The fake video was incredibly cinematic, dramatic, camera angles, the whole 9 yards. But what strikes me is that the actual verified truth that a 34-year-old man did, in reality, trip a teenager out of frustration is incredibly damning all on its own.
Yeah, you don't need special effects to make that look bad.
It didn't need AI enhancement to be a terrible look.
It didn't. But as damaging as the training ground incident is to his public perception, the dossier outlines a significantly more severe issue quietly ticking in the background.
A real legal, well, disciplinary problem.
A disciplinary issue that carries hard, undeniable sporting consequences. We must discuss the ongoing review by the Brazilian Football Confederation, the CBF.
Yes, and I want to be very precise here for you listening. We are looking at the facts of an ongoing investigation strictly as they are reported in the dossier.
We have to remain entirely objective here.
Right. We are not making moral judgments, taking political sides, or trying to litigate the allegations here. We are simply unpacking what this means structurally for his World Cup eligibility.
Exactly.
The CBF is currently reviewing allegations regarding sexist remarks that Neymar allegedly directed toward referee Savio Pereira Sampaio.
From a purely regulatory and administrative standpoint, the stakes of this specific CBF review are catastrophic for his World Cup ambitions.
How bad could it be?
The dossier points us to a highly relevant, very recent precedent within the Brazilian league involving a player named Gustavo Marques from Red Bull Bragantino.
Okay, what happened to him?
Marques was investigated for making discriminatory remarks against a female referee.
Yeah.
He was found guilty by the governing body, and they handed down a massive 12-match ban.
A 12-match ban. Let's really process that. If the CBF applies that exact same disciplinary precedent to Neymar,
which they theoretically have to maintain consistency.
And a suspension of that magnitude is officially handed down in the next couple of weeks, it acts as an instant, non-negotiable knockout blow.
It would be done.
He would be technically and legally ineligible to play on disciplinary grounds right as the World Cup kicks off.
It functions as an administrative guillotine.
Exactly. It is entirely separate from the health of his knee cartilage. It is separate from his training ground tantrums. It is a procedural reality that could end his international career with a stroke of a pen.
Which creates an almost impossibly complex matrix of risk for the decision makers. Let's synthesize everything we've discussed so far from the dossier.
Lay it all out.
You have a player with a severely compromised knee requiring specialized medical mapping. You have a player prone to public emotional outbursts that lead to formal complaints from his own teammates.
Check and check.
And you have a player simultaneously under review for a severe disciplinary infraction by his own national federation. And yet, despite all of that, he is still producing match-winning moments on the pitch.
Which leads us perfectly into the absolute nightmare of a dilemma facing the man at the top.
The poor guy who has to figure this out.
Because while Neymar is busy producing both goals and unhinged headlines, the ultimate decision of whether he gets on the plane to the World Cup falls squarely on the shoulders of one man, Brazil's head coach, Carlo Ancelotti.
A man who is used to dealing with stars, but maybe not like this.
Now, I need to understand this dynamic. How does a guy like Ancelotti, an elite, no-nonsense European manager who has won literally everything there is to win at the club level, even begin to process dealing with Brazil's biggest, most volatile cultural icon?
Ancelotti's entire approach to this situation has been a masterclass in strategic distancing.
Keeping him at arm's length.
Exactly. When he accepted the Brazil job in 2025, he brought a specific philosophy with him. His success is built on structural integrity, collective effort, and tactical discipline.
He's not going to just let players do whatever they want.
He is fundamentally not a manager who builds his systems around unpredictable individualistic divas. He has established a very strict, very public baseline requirement, stating, "I will only call up players who are 100% fit."
And he is refusing to budge on that. I'm looking at this interview he gave to the French outlet L'Équipe back on April 12th.
He was very clear in that interview.
He didn't mince words. He essentially laid down an ultimatum. He gave Neymar a 2-month window to prove himself.
A ticking clock.
He basically said, show me you have the physical qualities, show me you have the stamina, or you are out. But the pressure on Ancelotti isn't just a private conversation with the player. It is coming from the entire nation of Brazil.
The public outcry is immense.
There is this fascinating dynamic with the fans outlined in the dossier.
The psychological hold Neymar has on the public is undeniable.
It is wild. The dossier highlights a recent friendly match. Brazil is playing against France in Boston.
A huge exhibition game.
Brazil is losing the game 2-1. And what do the thousands of Brazilian fans in the stadium do? They don't chant for a tactical change. They start loudly chanting Neymar's name.
They want their hero.
They are actively demanding their savior. And Ancelotti's reply in the post-match press conference was just icy. He looked at the reporters and said, focus on the players who are here.
That specific moment in Boston is deeply symbolic of the overarching tension. Think about the image. Here is Carlo Ancelotti, a man with multiple Champions League titles, a tactical genius.
An absolute legend.
Being heckled by a stadium crowd to substitute in a ghost. They are demanding a player who isn't even in the stadium, who hasn't worn the national team shirt in over 2 years.
It's delusional in a way.
It perfectly illustrates how Neymar functions as a psychological crutch for a fan base terrified of losing its historical dominance. But Ancelotti is a ruthless pragmatist.
He only cares about what he can see on the field.
He is evaluating the reality on the pitch, not the mythology in the stands. And that brings us to an event that I believe is the true turning point in their entire relationship.
Yes. I have this circled in bright red in my notes, the Mirasol incident.
What's fascinating here is how quietly devastating this single event was.
It didn't make the front pages like the fight did.
It didn't generate the massive viral headlines of a training ground fight, but internally its impact was seismic.
Paint the picture for us. What actually happened?
Ancelotti, along with his core coaching staff, which crucially includes his son, Davide Ancelotti, who acts as his primary tactical sounding board, made a significant logistical effort.
They went out of their way.
They intentionally drove hours outside of their normal, comfortable scouting radius. They traveled specifically to watch Neymar play for Santos in a domestic match against a smaller club, Mirasol.
So they're making a real physical investment of time to evaluate him.
Exactly. They're sitting in the stands, they have their notebooks out, they are ready to evaluate his off-the-ball movement, His cardiovascular recovery after a sprint, his tactical commitment to Kuka's system,
They're doing their due diligence.
they are looking for reasons to believe. And Neymar simply didn't play.
He just didn't show up on the pitch.
He was entirely absent.
And the dossier notes that the CBF officials and Ancelotti's staff didn't interpret this as a simple, pre-planned medical rest day. They viewed this no-show as a massive, glaring lack of professional commitment.
It felt like a slap in the face to them.
I mean, you have the national team manager, the man holding the keys to your 5th World Cup, driving hours out of his way to see you, and you don't even take the field. It feels like the quiet killer of his chances.
It really does.
There were no dramatic arguments, no press conference blow-ups, just an empty patch of grass with where the star was supposed to be.
In high-performance elite sporting environments, trust is the ultimate currency.
And he broke that trust.
Ancelotti was willing to invest his time, essentially offering an olive branch, a tangible opportunity for Neymar to prove his worth through action.
Right.
By not playing, and frankly, regardless of the internal Santos medical reasoning behind it, the message received by the European coaching staff was one of profound unreliability.
Which is the one thing Ancelotti hates.
Exactly. For a manager who values tactical system and week-in, week-out reliability above all other traits, that is a fatal flaw.
Which brings us to the breaking news from literally just a few days ago, May 4th and 5th. A major, highly respected Brazilian outlet, Estadão, drops an absolute bombshell report.
This really shifted the conversation.
They are stating that Ancelotti is internally extremely displeased with Neymar's overall conduct. And you have to assume that is a cumulative frustration. The Mirassol no-show, the training fight with the teenager, the looming disciplinary suspension, the general circus that follows him.
It's all piling up.
The report claims Ancelotti has practically ruled out Neymar from his final World Cup plans. Now, we want to be very, very clear with you. The listener, the dossier specifically notes this is credible reporting from a major journalistic outlet, but it remains unconfirmed by the CBF or Ancelotti directly as of our recording today.
We must treat it as a highly significant, highly educated indicator of the internal weather at the CBF, even if it isn't the final official verdict with a stamp on it.
It's a huge leak, basically.
It signals that the intense internal debate within the coaching staff is leaning heavily toward exclusion. And how is Neymar's camp handling this immense pressure and this wave of negative reporting?
They are doing exactly what they have done for over a decade. They are running the exact same playbook. Neymar Sr., his father and primary agent, is out there doing what he has done since the messy Barcelona transfer saga back in 2013. He is taking his grievances public and complaining to the press.
Using the media as a weapon.
He is openly criticizing Ancelotti for leaving his son out of the pre-World Cup friendlies. He is trying to generate external pressure. But the dossier reports that all this noise, all this public whining from his father, is only souring relations further with the CBF hierarchy.
It's backfiring spectacularly.
It is like they are trying to bully a multi-time Champions League winning manager into submission through media soundbites. And Carlo Ancelotti is fundamentally not a man who gets bullied.
It is a fundamental miscalculation of leverage by Neymar's camp.
They think it's still 2015.
Neymar Sr. is employing the exact same aggressive PR tactics that worked brilliantly when Neymar was 22 years old, fully fit, and widely recognized as the undeniable future of world football.
When he was untouchable.
Back then, you catered to the demands because the talent dictates it. At 34, with a surgically rebuilt knee, a rap sheet of disciplinary issues, and 31 months of international absence, those same tactics are no longer viewed as necessary evils.
They're just annoying now.
They're viewed simply as disruptive noise. It only reinforces Ancelotti's primary fear that bringing Neymar isn't just bringing a player, it is bringing an uncontrollable, chaotic circus that destabilizes the entire camp.
Okay, so let's game this out. If Ancelotti actually pulls the trigger, ignores the noise, and leaves Neymar at home, who actually fills that massive void?
That's the practical side of this whole mess.
Because you don't just magically erase 79 international goals and a decade of tactical reliance without a serious backup plan. And moreover, how does the rest of the squad feel about potentially leaving their all-time top scorer, their captain in spirit, behind?
The locker room dynamics are crucial.
Let's look at the changing of the guard and the locker room politics that are clearly bubbling under the surface right now.
The most important thing to understand is that the tactical void is already being filled. Brazil has not been sitting in a state of suspended animation waiting for 31 months.
They had to move on.
Ancelotti has actively, systematically built a completely new hierarchy. The centerpiece of the Brazilian attack, the focal point of their current pressing triggers and offensive transition, is no longer Neymar. It is 25-year-old Vinicius Jr.
And he has earned it.
He absolutely has. He is in world-class form for Real Madrid.
Mm.
But more importantly for Ancelotti, Vinicius Jr. possesses the raw pace, the physical durability to play every 3 days, and crucially, the tactical discipline to execute a high-intensity system.
And right behind him is the new generational prodigy, 19-year-old Endrick.
The future of Brazil.
The dossier notes he literally took Neymar's spot in the attacking lineup during the recent pre-World Cup friendlies. But hold on, I'm looking at the dossier and I need to push back on this narrative that Brazil is just overflowing with perfectly healthy, ready-made replacements.
That's not a perfect picture, no.
The math is starting to look a little shaky. Rodrigo is out recovering from knee ligament surgery. Estevao, another incredible young talent, is desperately racing the clock with a grade 4 muscle injury.
The injuries are definitely piling up.
So, from a pure numbers game, they actually need warm bodies in the attacking third. Spots in Group C are mathematically opening up. But here's the real question for you. Even if they desperately need a body on the bench, does bringing in a semi-fit 34-year-old Neymar fundamentally disrupt Vinicius Jr.'s newly established leadership?
That is the big fear.
And further, what does fit enough even mean when you are talking about the sheer physical intensity of a World Cup tournament where you play every 4 days?
You are hitting on the invisible, incredibly delicate chemistry of squad building. Let's define fit enough. For Ancelotti, fit enough does not mean you can juggle a ball and score a free kick.
Or get an 8.8 rating against Recoleta.
Right. It means you have the cardiovascular capacity to press the opposition center backs, to track back and cover your fullback defensively, and to execute complex, high-speed tactical instructions for 90 minutes, recovering entirely within 72 hours to do it again.
Which we know Neymar cannot do right now. Cuca has him on that 60-minute limit.
Neymar right now is not capable of being that player. If you bring him, you are actively bringing a player who demands the ball at his feet, who dictates his own tempo, who routinely invites fouls, and who carries a massive, inescapable gravitational pull with the media.
It changes everything about how the team functions.
Vinicius Jr. has fought hard to earn the right to lead this team. He is the tactical focal point. He shouldn't have to defer, consciously or subconsciously, to the ghosts of Brazil's past every time he makes a run.
That would be so unfair to him.
Integrating Neymar into the camp now could absolutely short-circuit the tactical spacing and psychological hierarchy Ancelotti has spent a full year cultivating.
But the dossier reveals that not everyone in that locker room wants to see the ghost banished. This is where the internal politics get really spicy.
The old guard is pushing back.
The veterans are actively, publicly defending him. Marquinhos, who is the current captain of the squad, went on the record saying he is certain Neymar will be at the World Cup.
Which puts Ancelotti in a tough spot.
He is drawing a very clear line in the sand. And Casemiro, who is currently finishing up his contract at Manchester United and reportedly leaving the club, went on ESPN Brazil to make this impassioned public plea.
I saw that interview.
He urged Neymar to just humble himself, have a quiet conversation with Ancelotti, and accept a 20 to 30-minute bench role.
It is a fascinating dynamic to observe. You have to synthesize these statements and look at the underlying psychological motivations.
That's what's really driving them.
We have to ask, are Casemiro and Marquinhos acting out of genuine, objective, tactical belief? Do they truly believe that a 30-minute, physically compromised cameo from Neymar is the missing tactical piece Brazil needs to break down a low block and win a World Cup?
Or is it something deeper?
Or, as the dossier astutely implies, are these aging veterans simply looking out for each other at the twilight of their international careers? They are all of a similar generation. They have shared the profound pressure of the national team for a decade.
They've been to war together.
They have been through the agonizing World Cup exits together. There is a deeply ingrained loyalty there, a very human desire for one last ride together on the biggest stage.
It is touching, honestly. It's two old warriors looking out for their embattled friend. But looking at it from a broader perspective, it could also be an incredibly strategic, almost manipulative move.
It forces Ancelotti's hand.
By publicly backing him, by going on ESPN and making these pleas, they shift the immense pressure directly onto Ancelotti. Think about it. If Ancelotti leaves Neymar off the list now, he risks actively alienating his captain, Marquinhos, and the entire veteran core of the locker room right before they fly to a massive tournament.
Which could ruin the camp before it even starts.
It is an absolute minefield of locker room politics.
It is a minefield. But Ancelotti's job is to navigate it objectively. He has to weigh the sentimental, emotional value of veteran loyalty against the cold, hard, unforgiving metrics of modern tournament football.
And the numbers don't look good for Neymar.
A 20-minute bench roll sounds incredibly pragmatic in theory. But as we discussed regarding his gravitational pull, Neymar doesn't just sit quietly on a bench.
He's not a normal substitute.
The incessant media focus, the fans constantly chanting his name when the team is struggling, like we saw in Boston, the constant camera cuts to his facial expressions on the sideline. It is an uncontrollable distraction engine.
Exactly, which means whether he actually makes this 26-man squad when it is announced on May 18th or not, the clock is undeniably rapidly ticking down on Neymar's career at the absolute highest echelon of the sport.
The end is coming, one way or another.
So what actually happens after the summer of 2026? Let's look at the end of the line and the post-World Cup speculation that is already starting to leak out into the press.
The mere fact that there is active, detailed post-World Cup speculation occurring right now, 12 days before the most important squad announcement of his life, it tells you everything you need to know about where his camp's mindset might secretly be residing.
I am so glad you brought this up because I wanted to share this unconfirmed but utterly wild rumor from the end of the dossier.
Oh, this is the MLS rumor.
Allegedly, Neymar's representatives are already engaged in post-World Cup talks to move him to Major League Soccer in the United States. Specifically, they are reportedly talking to Cincinnati FC for the 2027 season.
Cincinnati FC.
So what does this all mean? Let's paint this picture for a second. Lionel Messi is already in the United States. He has completely rewritten the financial and cultural landscape of the league.
You changed everything over there.
If Neymar joins MLS, a Neymar-Messi reunion in the U.S., even if they are playing on entirely different teams, would be the most dramatic, highly monetized retirement plan in the history of the sport.
It grounds the entire conversation we've been having in a very sobering commercial reality.
It's all about the brand now.
While his father is picking fights with the CBF in the press, and the loyal fans are chanting his name in Boston, the massive business apparatus surrounding Neymar is already quietly looking past the World Cup.
They know it's over in Europe.
It is a tacit internal acknowledgement that regardless of what Ancelotti decides next week, the highest levels of European club football and likely the intense, unforgiving demands of international tournament play are permanently closing their doors to him.
It feels like the final, inevitable transition from a competitive titan fighting for trophies to a global brand ambassador playing exhibition matches.
It's a different phase of life.
The move to Saudi Arabia was clearly the first step in that transition, and this MLS rumor is the logical second step. But before we get to the retirement tour in 2027, we have to survive the agonizing tension of the next 12 days.
Precisely. Let's recap the absolute regency of the moment we are in right now.
Okay, here is the board as it stands for you listening. There are 12 days left until the squad announcement.
12 days.
Ancelotti is locked in a room, working from a 55-man preliminary list, trying to carve out a perfect 26-man final squad.
And trying to ignore the noise.
You have a 34-year-old player battling his own surgically rebuilt knee who is currently facing a potential 12-match CBF suspension for verbal abuse.
A huge, looming threat.
Who just had to publicly apologize for tripping an 18-year-old in practice, all while answering to a pragmatic European coach who demands physical perfection and absolute tactical obedience from a player whose entire global brand is built on defying structure and thriving in chaos.
And this is exactly why, for you listening to this is so much more than a transient sports trivia update.
It really is.
You are watching a profound, real-time case study. You are witnessing what happens when an undeniable, historical, generational talent violently collides with the unforgiving, inevitable realities of aging, physical decline, necessary discipline, and uncompromising management.
It's almost a tragedy.
It is the twilight of a footballing god, and it is happening under the brightest, most unforgiving lights imaginable.
Which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought. A scenario I want you to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
The ultimate dilemma.
Imagine the squad is finally announced on May 18th. If Ancelotti stands firm, leaves Neymar at home, and Brazil goes to the World Cup and loses.
Oh, he's done for.
Ancelotti will be absolutely crucified by the press and the public. He will be blamed for ignoring the country's greatest ever scorer, for lacking the imagination to utilize a genius.
They'll say he was too stubborn.
But if Ancelotti caves to the pressure, If he takes a half-fit Neymar and Brazil loses because that superstar disrupts the fragile chemistry and the tactical system that Vinicius Jr. relies on,
They'll be blamed just the same.
Ancelotti will still be blamed for caving to the immense cultural pressure. He is in a position where he literally cannot win.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
So the real question you have to ask yourself is, what happens to a football-obsessed nation when its greatest individual talent becomes the very thing holding its team hostage?
It's a question they have 12 days to answer.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will be watching The Wire closely on May 18th.